What up, good people? Welcome back to the channel. I hope all of y'all are doing well out there. Now, real quick, before we get into it, let me just show you something real quick. Hold up. So this is my Sony A7 IV, and this is the camera that I typically use to record these talking head segments. So just know, I am on a mystery camera right now. Now, if all goes well, and I like the camera, I like the image quality it's putting out, I will reveal what this camera is to y'all at a later date. But for now, just as a hint, am I in focus? But just getting into the topic for today, you may remember a couple of videos ago, I rented out the Panasonic LUMIX S9, mainly because there's a lot of talk around this camera, there was a lot of hype around this camera, and really I just wanted to test it out for myself, for both photo and video, and just kind of see how I felt about it as both a Sony and Fuji shooter. Specifically, I wanted to test it out against my Sony A7CII and my Fuji X-M5, and really try to understand where the S9 stacks up compared to these two cameras. And after a few days, I've been using it for a little bit, I have some thoughts and I'd like to get into those. So with all that said, y'all, let's go ahead and dive in. Now, just to set some expectations, I didn't get a lot of time with this camera, just a few days. I actually got to go return it first thing tomorrow morning, so I didn't test every single thing that I wanted to with the S9. But I did get to use it long enough to really understand what this camera is all about, especially within the context of using it alongside the Sony A7CII and the Fuji X-M5. So with all that said, let's go ahead and get into the first category. User experience. Now, there are actually a lot of different factors that can go into overall user experience, but I want to touch on a few key areas. First off, I want to talk about ergonomics and body style. The S9, the A7CII, the X-M5, they all kind of adopt this more rangefinder body style. It's funny enough, the A7CII is the only one that has the finder part of the rangefinder body style with the EVF. Not a true rangefinder, but it does give you something to compose your shot other than a back LCD screen. Versus the S9 and the X-M5, which only use an LCD screen in order to help you frame your shot. But the LUMIX S9 probably has the most traditional rangefinder body style of the three because it is so rectangular, it is skinny, and it is pretty flat on the front. How this translates to ergonomics is that it's probably the least comfortable to hold because it is pretty flat on the front and it's pretty weighty, especially with this 20-60 lens on there. And quite honestly, I don't know how many lightweight lenses there are for the S9. So if you're going to be holding it, you're going to have a lot of weight on this camera, be holding it for any amount of time. You may want to get an external grip for it because there's really nothing to hold on to on the front of this camera. It is nice that they added that leather texture. It does give you a little bit of friction on your fingers, so you have something to kind of hold on to. And of course, on the back of the S9, there is that thumb rest for you to rest your thumb and give you a little extra grip. But overall, the ergonomics and the S9, they just didn't really work for me. Now with the Fuji X-M5, I would say I think it's probably a little step above the S9 when it comes to ergonomics, just because on the front it does have that little indentation for you to put your fingers in, but the Fuji X-M5 is so small that you don't really get your whole hand on it. Me myself, I've adopted the technique of just having two fingers in the front and my thumb in the back, and I kind of adopt this little eagle claw thing and I just hold on really tight. But ultimately I do still need a third-party grip on the Fuji X-M5 for more regular use. Another thing I'll say about the X-M5 versus the S9 is that it's a lot lighter, and so the weight doesn't really get to you as much, even though the ergonomics aren't the best. But by far, the ergonomics on the A7CII, they're just a winner out of these three cameras. It has that nice big grip on the front, probably less traditional on a rangefinder body, but it really helps for just holding the camera. I don't even feel like I have to hold a tight grip on the A7CII. I can just kind of rest it in my palm. I don't really have a need for a third-party grip on this camera, even though I have one. I think the grip by itself is enough on the A7CII. The next thing I want to talk about for user experience is the LCD screen. This is super important with the S9 and the X-M5 because that's all they have. As I previously mentioned, there are no EVFs on this camera, and the LCD becomes super important for framing your shot. And I'm proud to say the S9 has a really nice LCD screen. Out of the three of these cameras, it has the highest resolution at 1.84 million dots. The A7CII has a 1.3 1.36 million dot, and the Fuji X-M5 has a 1.4 million dot LCD panel. Funny enough, the X-M5 has a higher res screen than the A7CII. I just think that's funny, but it has no EVF, so I guess it balances out. But back to the S9. As I mentioned in the last video I talked about this camera, it was plenty bright, it was plenty high resolution enough for me to go out on a sunny day, take some really good shots, and really be able to see the screen in order to compose my shot. And so I really like that on the S9. I really like how that LCD panel looks, and yeah, I'm glad they decided to go higher resolution, especially because there is no EVF on this camera. Next up for user experience, let's talk dials and buttons. On the surface, you know, it looks pretty run-of-the-mill, pretty status quo. You know, you got your PASM dial, you got your shutter button, got your record button. On the back, you got your little D-pad. You may have like a little joystick or something like that. It's got everything I need, everything I'm used to seeing when I'm doing photography on either my Sony or my Fuji cameras. But there are a few things as far as the S9's buttons and dials that I do want to speak on. First off is the LUT button. The LUT button is super interesting because it very much reminds me of the film simulation dial on the Fuji X-M5. With the LUT button on the S9, you can just press it and then select the LUT that you want to use for either photo or video. And I think that's really cool that you can just summon a creative look on the fly with a dedicated button or dial on the X-M5. What I will say is the LUT button isn't as streamlined as the film simulation dial. You do have to press the button in and then you just cycle through the LUT that you want to use. On the X-M5, you can kind of see the film simulations right off the bat, and as you toggle it, it just sets it for you, and so there's no extra step. It's just a turn of the dial and you're in your simulation. With the LUT button, you got to press the button and then start toggling through your different LUTs. And so it's one extra step on the S9, but it's not that bad. Another thing I'll say is that if you're in a color profile other than real-time LUT, say you're in Vlog and you press that LUT button and select a LUT, it will automatically switch you back over to real-time LUT color profile so that you can go ahead and use that LUT. And I think that's pretty nice because I would hate to have to go back, switch my color profile, then hit the LUT button, then select my LUT, and then go out and shoot. That would just be too many steps. I'm glad Lumix thought of that. And overall, both the iteration on the LUMIX S9 and the Fuji X-M5 is so much easier to use than getting creative looks on the A7CII. With the A7CII, you got to make sure that setting is in your function menu, select that, then select your creative look, and then dial it in or however you want to dial it. It's just more cumbersome on the A7CII. But the thing is, if you dial in your custom settings, you probably will never have to touch either the dial, the LUT button, or go into the creative look menus on the A7CII. So speaking of custom settings, let's talk about how custom settings work on all three of these cameras' PASM dials. Now, the way it works on the LUMIX S9 is super interesting. It has 3 custom settings, but you can assign up to 12 custom settings with just these 3 options on the PASM dial. Your C1 and C2 custom settings on the PASM dial, those are pretty much just one and done. You set a custom look, assign it to either C1 or C2, and then that's just going to be the custom setting for that particular option on the PASM dial. But when you get to C3, Lumix has set it up so that C3 has multiple custom settings that you can switch between. They'll have like a C3-1, C3-2, C3-3, so on and so forth. And so when you switch the PASM dial to C3, you can then hit your menu button. It will allow you to toggle in which C3 custom settings that you want to put in for whatever scenario that you're shooting in. And so I think that's an interesting iteration. It's not immediately apparent how you would do that, or it's not the most user-friendly, but once you find it, once you figure it out, super useful. On the X-M5, it gives you 4 custom settings on the PASM dial, but for each of those 4, you can either set it to a photo mode or a video mode. So you can have a custom setting for photo and you can have a custom setting for video on each one of the 4 options on the PASM dial. The only thing with that is that if you want to say switch over from photo to video, you got to go back into the menu and switch it back over between those 2 shooting modes. And so that's also a little bit slower if you want to quickly switch between all your options. But essentially that does give you 4 custom modes, 4 for video, 4 for photo. By far, I think the best iteration of this is the way that's done on the A7CII. It has 3 custom settings on the PASM dial, but the PASM dial also has a mode switch. It has a photo mode, it has a video mode, and it has a slow and quick mode. Once you switch to photo mode, you have 3 custom settings. When you switch to video mode, you have 3 custom settings. And then when you switch to S and Q, you have 3 custom settings, all without having to go back into the Sony menu. menus. And so I really like Sony's iteration of that on the A7C II, because switching between custom settings is just a hardware option versus a combination of hardware and software options. But speaking of software, let's talk menus. By far, I think the S9 definitely has the most options out of these three cameras in their menus. Basically anything you can think of, it's in the S9 menus, and you can customize it to your heart's content, which is really nice. However, it's not the easiest to navigate or to find what you're looking for, and so I think the organization, the user experience could be improved on the S9, but I do love that they give you so many options. One good example is just the wide amount of video shooting options that the S9 offers. This is the same for photo, this is the same for audio. The S9 just gives you a lot of options to choose from. But I'm gonna be honest, I don't think any of these cameras menus are perfect. What I would say is that whatever your most used settings are, whatever the things you find yourself going to the most, wanting to tweak the most, I would just put that in your own custom menu. On the A7C II and the X-M5, I think they call it the My menu. And then on the S9, there is just a user tab where you can create your own custom pages of menu options. And so that's what I recommend. Create your own custom menu with all the options that you typically use, so that you're not just waiting around in these camera menus forever for the end of all time, But I think that'll about do it for user experience. Let's go ahead and get into the next category. Photography. Now, when it comes to photography on these three cameras, one big differentiating factor about the S9 that I have to mention right off the bat is that the S9 only has electronic shutter versus the A7C II and the Fuji X-M5, which both have mechanical shutter and electronic shutter. But it's not all bad for the S9. I think there are some advantages and disadvantages to electronic shutter, namely the advantages being you can shoot at higher shutter speeds and you can shoot with the shutter on silent when you want to do street photography and you want to kind of go unnoticed and be a little bit more stealth. But the disadvantages being there's a higher probability of rolling shutter, and I don't think you would be able to use a flash with the S9, especially because it is the only camera of these three that does not have a hot shoe mount. It has a mount, but there are no electronic connections for you to connect a flash, either a receiver or just one of the little mini flashes. So I think flash is out of the question for the LUMIX S9. But spoiler alert, photography on the S9 is actually pretty good. I'd say the image quality falls somewhere between the Sony images and the Fuji images. Not saying that it's better or worse than either or, I think they all kind of have their own thing. But on the Sony end of the spectrum, I think the S9 is able to produce some really high quality, crisp, clear, sharp images that you can take into Capture One, into Lightroom, take those raw files, you can move them around fairly well with different adjustments and really dial in the looks that you're trying to get. On the Fuji end of the spectrum, it also has the ability to create some really nice straight out of camera JPEGs that have a lot of character. In the S9, you can change things like your tone curve, you can change clarity, you can change your white balance, your dynamic range, you can add grain to your photos, all directly in camera, and kind of create your own looks, your own recipes, or as Fuji calls them, real-time LUTs. It really allows you to get that level of character to your images straight out of camera without having to edit them in post. And so I think the LUMIX S9 is, when we're talking image capabilities, image quality, I think it's kind of the best of both worlds. But to take it even further, I think the S9 has something that really sets it apart, and that is the LUMIX LAB app. As I mentioned, the S9 has this concept of real-time LUTs, but not only can you affect those real-time LUT settings in camera, you can also use the LUMIX LAB app. And the LUMIX LAB app is super powerful. It's basically allows you to either view a collection of real-time LUTs done by other creators, but not only that, you can actually go in, upload some photos that you've taken from your S9, edit the photo in the LUMIX LAB app, so affect everything like the color, the tone curve, grain, clarity, all that good stuff. And then once you got it how you like it, you can actually save that as your own specific real-time LUT and then upload that LUT back to your camera. The X-M5 has something similar. For creating recipes, you do have Fuji X Weekly. You also have the Fuji Style app, which is iOS only. Thank God I have an iPad, but the Fuji Style app does allow you to look at recipes created by other photographers, and you can upload them directly to your Fuji camera. But still, it's not quite as streamlined as the LUMIX LAB app, especially because it doesn't have any Android compatibility. And then on the A7C II, it's probably the least streamlined of the bunch. I think Sony's still working out their creative looks, but you can go in, you can change their creative looks, but then you have to go to a different part of the settings for white balance and then a different part of the settings for your dynamic range optimizer. And there's no ability to change grain in the A7CII. And so definitely less streamlined on the Sony camera. And I definitely think the LUMIX is a step above when it comes to being able to have a streamlined flow for creating very special looks and then quickly getting them onto your camera in order for you to go out and shoot. Last category, video. Like I mentioned before, the LUMIX S9 has way more shooting modes than both the A7CII and the Fuji X-M5. You can do everything from 6.2 open gate to 4K to 3.8K to 3.3K. You can shoot 24 frames per second, 60 frames per second, 48 frames per second. You get 422, you get 420 10-bit, you get 8-bit. I don't know why you want 8-bit, but you get it. And LUMIX has really just thrown in every video option that you can possibly want in this camera. However, I will say it wasn't as easy to get to those video options, because what I didn't know is that in order for you to access some of the video shooting modes, you kind of have to set your file format to something specific. I previously had it in MP4, and if you're in the MP4 format, you can't shoot 6.2K open gate and access all those other shooting modes. You have to be in MOV in order to get those shooting modes. That wasn't immediately apparent, but I figured it out. I found it eventually. So it wasn't that big of a hiccup for me. But just taking the S9 out around San Diego, you know, I thought the video quality was really nice. I first took it out with the Sony A7CII because, quite frankly, I think these cameras are way more similar than the S9 and the X-M5. But taking it out with the A7CII, these cameras kind of perform the same. I did keep the shooting modes to a minimum on the S9. I basically kept it at 4K 24 and 4K 60 in order to keep the comparison close. And I also use similar lenses. On the S9, of course, I had the 20 to 60, and then on the Sony A7CII, I have the 20 to 70. I also tried to match the apertures just so I can kind of keep the comparison the same. And I think the image quality was very similar. S-Log 3 on the A7CII and V-Log on the S9. They were both fairly easy to grade. I was able to push the colors around. The image quality was looking great. I think the stabilization might have been better on the S9, especially shooting handheld. I wasn't really doing any herky-jerk movements, but from what I could see, it seemed like the stabilization just looked better on the S9. But both of these cameras had really good quality shooting at 4K 60 and 4K 24. But the S9 also shoots 6.2K open gate, and for that, I took it out with the Fuji X-M5. Quite honestly, these cameras are in two different tiers. I think the S9 is a tier above the Fuji X-M5, and I think the price reflects that as well. The S9 is a full frame camera and the X-M5 is an APS-C size camera, and I wanted to see, would there be an image quality difference between 6.2K open gate on full frame versus 6.2K open gate on APS-C. I should also mention that the open gate on the Fuji X-M5 is 422 10-bit and the open gate on the S9 is 420 10-bit. I don't know if that's gonna make a difference, but y'all let me know what y'all think. So we are on the LUMIX S9. Now I'm out here at the lake, as you can see back here. This is the lake going on right here with the little hills going, and LUMIX S9, just practicing vlogging on it. I do have it set to 6.2K open gate. I have it at V-Log, that way I can color grade later and test it against the Fuji X-M5's F-Log. And yeah, we got the stabilization going. I'm walking on this dirt path here, as you can see. And yeah, so the lens is set to 20 millimeters, that way I get the best view or best angle for vlogging. And we got our Sennheiser mic on here for audio. And so how does this look? How do I sound? Is it good quality? Y'all let me know. All right, and so this is the Fuji X-M5. Now, I have the Sigma 18 to 50 on here, and I set it to 13 millimeters just to be close to the 20 millimeter lens on the LUMIX S9. I try to get the same focal length. We are shooting 6.2K open gate. How is the stabilization? Right now, there is no stabilization turned on. I know the S9 does have built-in in-body stabilization. The X-M5 does not. So, is there that big of a difference? Keep in mind, I am walking on gravel, if you can see here.
I am walking on gravel. And so how does this look? Does it look good? Does it not? Is it too jittery? Y'all let me know. Also, as far as base ISO goes, I am shooting on a bright sunny day here, and so the base ISO on the X-M5 is 1250, which is not ideal for bright conditions, but if you have an ND filter, you should be fine. On the S9, you can get down to 640, which is a little bit better, and it also has another base ISO of 4000 shooting vlog. And so those are just kind of some of the differences here as far as what you can do as far as performance. Also, I will say the X-M5 is a lot lighter to hold, so if you're going to be vlogging for a prolonged period of time holding the camera, it's a lot easier to do with the X-M5.
Now, to me, when looking at that footage, I definitely think that the S9 was more stable, but I gotta be honest, I think the X-M5 held its own. For a camera that comes in what, $300 or $400 less than the S9, I think Fuji is doing their thing. But overall, I do admit that I think the open gate quality on the S9 is a little bit better than the X-M5, which in my opinion, it should be. Now, as far as autofocus goes, I didn't really do any extensive, intensive tests. I just used these cameras in various scenarios. I just saw how the autofocus performed. I may or may not have tried out a feature or two from the S9 and the A7CII and the X-M5 with autofocus just to kind of see what it can do, but I didn't really do anything super extensive. And one thing I really like about the S9 is that they did recently move from contrast-based autofocus to phase detect, but they also added touch tracking, which I think that was a nice touch, especially if you want to move the camera but keep your subject in focus. And it was nice that they added that. Also, the A7CII does have touch tracking as well, but it goes a step beyond because it does have that auto framing feature which leverages AI, and so I think Sony is still kind of a step ahead. I also noticed that autofocus on the Sony was a little bit stickier, not by much, but just a little bit more. And then on the X-M5, the autofocus is cool, it's good, but I will say with the autofocus on the X-M5, I have to be more mindful about putting the focus box or putting my area box in the vicinity of the thing I want the X-M5 to focus on in order to make sure, and that just gives me more peace of mind with the X-M5. But it still came out great, it still worked for me, and if I had to rank them, Sony, LUMIX, Fuji. But with all that being said, with everything that I've talked about during this video, from user experience to photography to video, what are my overall thoughts on the LUMIX S9, especially as it compares to both the A7CII and the Fuji X-M5? Am I gonna switch to LUMIX? No. Is this an amazing camera? Heck yeah. The LUMIX S9 is an amazing compact full frame camera that offers some really good image quality for both photo and video. It gives you a wide array of shooting options, menu options, in order for you to customize your settings exactly the way you like it for the way that you shoot. And paired with the LUMIX LAB app, you can dial in your own custom looks and really get your own signature style dialed in order for you to go out and shoot with. And so I think the LUMIX S9 stacks up pretty nicely to both the A7CII and the X-M5. As I mentioned before, I think the S9 is a tier above the X-M5 just because of price points. It's full frame versus APS-C, but I also think the S9 is very comparable to the A7CII. I think they can go toe to toe. Me personally, I think I would still go with the A7CII just because it is more of a true hybrid for both photo and video. I feel like the S9 is definitely more video focused, but the A7CII with that EVF, the hot shoot for using a flash, the custom modes and custom settings dials in order for you to get specific shooting modes just at the flip of a switch is really nice. I feel like the A7CII is more of a true hybrid versus the S9, which is it's a hybrid, but it's probably 60-40 video to photo. In that respect, I actually think the S9 is more like the X-M5 than the A7CII. And so when I think about who I would recommend the S9 to, I would definitely say someone who is getting their first full frame camera, looking to enter into a camera ecosystem. I think the S9 is a really good option. I think if you're looking for an EDC cam, the S9 could be a good camera. You might want to see if you can find a smaller lens. I don't know if they exist, but y'all let me know in the comments. Or if you're already a LUMIX shooter and you're looking for a good B cam, a smaller camera just to walk around with, I think the S9 is a really good choice. But yeah, overall, I think it is a really good camera. But yeah, y'all, that's about all I have to say for the LUMIX S9. If you like this video, go ahead and drop it a like. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell to stay informed on all future content. And until next time, y'all, I will catch y'all later.